Hi there. My name is Santiago, and today's readings are going to be found in James 4 and 5 and 1 Timothy 1 and 2. And as always, I highly recommend that you read through these chapters yourself. I'm going to go through these and try and pull out a few points that I think are noteworthy, but there really is too much going on to cover in just a few minutes, and I'm going to have to skip over some things that I would really love to talk about, simply because there's no time. So please, take some time for yourself and study these chapters. They're really good stuff in here. So James 4. James 4 starts off in a familiar way. He continues with the theme of submission that we heard Paul speaking about in Ephesians, and basically says the problem is that people needed to learn to submit themselves to God. He says that they were fighting and talking bad about each other, and all because of frustrations with their lives, frustrations that they couldn't get the things that they wanted to get, so they were taking it out on each other. And isn't that true? I mean, really, we have a bad day at work and we get frustrated because life isn't going the way we want it to, and who pays for it? Your wife, your husband, your kids, your parents, basically whoever happens to be nearby. And they were doing the same thing. But James said that they weren't getting what they wanted because they weren't asking God. And when they did ask God, they still didn't get what they wanted because they were asking with the wrong motives. Wrong motives. Again, it sounds very familiar. We all try and make, I do, try and make my prayers sound really spiritual, but at the end, what I really want is just God to make my life better. I do it all the time. But he says that we're to stop trying to advance our agenda, to submit ourselves to God. And he says God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. God opposes the proud. Ouch. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want God to actively oppose me in anything. I have enough things opposing me. I don't need God opposing me. Have you ever prayed for something and it's like you get the exact opposite of what you're praying for? When that happens, I have to ask myself, could it be that God is purposefully opposing me in this moment because of my pride and my refusal to submit to his will? James warned them to take a look at their lives. He said, you guys go and you make all these plans and you say, tomorrow we're going to go here and there and spend a year and carry on business and make some money, and you guys don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know if you're even going to be alive. Basically challenging them to not just live for themselves, not just for their own agendas, but instead submit their plans to God. And he gives a warning to the rich people. I know. You're not rich. Right? No one in our society is rich, right? Only the guy who makes more than us is rich. But he says, look, you're hoarding your wealth for yourselves. Hoarding your wealth. And I think we can all realize that we're all guilty of that. We're living in self-indulgence. He says that they've fattened themselves for the day of slaughter. So I read this and I think basically we need to stop worrying so much about protecting what's ours or getting what we deserve or protecting our comfy way of life, but instead submit our plans to him. Give up the frustration over things that aren't going the way we want them to. Be patient. Stop the grumbling against each other. Just submit to him. And when we do, our focus changes. It becomes less me-focused and more him-focused. And then very quickly becomes others-focused. See, then we start seeing things differently. We can sing songs of praise when we're happy and pray for each other when they're sick. And then something interesting. Earlier he was talking about prayers not being answered, right? Now it changes. And he says that prayers do get answered. He says, the prayer of a righteous man is powerful and effective. It's a big difference. It's a big difference. And since now we're others focused, so instead of fighting with each other over when someone does something wrong, our inclination is to help them. We want to help them. And he says if somebody wanders away from the truth, we work to bring that person back. And he says whoever turns a sinner from the error of their ways will save them from death and cover over a multitude of sins. So the goal, it's not to win an argument anymore, but to bring the person back to Christ. And that's a big difference. It's a big difference. You know, unfortunately at the time, just like today, not only had a lot of people fallen away, but many had a voice and they tried to get others to follow them. So when we get to 1 Timothy, Paul starts writing instructions to Timothy on how he can deal with some of these false teachers. And he lists out a bunch of offenses. Murder and sexual immorality and slave traders and liars and all that. But I want to focus for a minute on homosexuality, because I think that many in the church are just, honestly, just scared to talk about it. We don't want to be labeled as a hater or something, so we just keep quiet. And as I said, just like in Paul's days, there are some out there who are trying to scare Christians into silence. So let me give you a brief summary on how I think these scriptures are calling us to respond. One, in everything, we need to make sure that we're not seeking our own agenda, but rather that we are making sure that we have submitted ourselves to God. Submitted ourselves to God. Remember, God opposes the proud, but he shows favor to the humble. The moment that we start thinking that our sin is not as bad as somebody else's sin, we got a problem. Second, once our heart is right, we're going to feel an urgency to turn a sinner from the error of their ways, to save them from death. As James 5:20 says, it clearly says in 1 Timothy 1:10, practicing homosexuality is one of the sins that we need to help people turn from. Now notice the qualifier here. It says practicing homosexuality. Temptations are never considered sinful. Never. It's our response to the temptation that makes a difference. Now, I know some people might say, you know what, this isn't fair. What if I was born this way? Are you going to try and encourage me to betray who I am and my natural tendencies? And you know, some are even trying to prove that there's some genetic component and like if that's going to change something. But the fact is, we've all of us have inherited a sinful nature. We know this. We're all born with a natural tendency to sin. I was born with a natural tendency toward heterosexual sin. Someone else was born with a tendency to homosexual sin. It's all sin. Should I be true to my natural tendencies and cheat on my wife? Of course not. I have to learn to put the sinful nature to death. Psalm 51 says, surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me. Yet you desired faithfulness, even in the womb. And later on in Romans it says, there's no one righteous, not even one, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And Paul himself says, Christ came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the worst. Paul, I am the worst. He said he was one of the worst sinners. Guy who wrote almost half the Bible, right? Our particular sin, whatever it is, really isn't the issue. The issue is our attitude toward it. Are we going to try and defend ourselves and hold on to our sinful nature, or are we going to humble ourselves and submit to God? Remember, God shows favor to the humble. It's the one who in their pride says that I'm not doing anything wrong that has the problem. But it also says in 1 John 1:19, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. And that's good news. That's good news. Until next time.